Continue to rise in Kenya following the death in police custody of political blogger Albert Ojwang, whose case has sparked widespread public outrage and fresh concerns about police brutality in the country. The incident, now under investigation, has led to the arrest of 2 senior police officers and a CCTV technician allegedly involved in tampering with surveillance footage. Kenya's Deputy Inspector General of Police, Eliud Lagat, has also stepped aside, at least temporarily, as the scrutiny intensifies. Human rights groups and opposition voices have mobilized for nationwide protests, calling for accountability, police reform, and greater protection of civil liberties. So to help us unpack the latest developments and what they mean for Kenya's political landscape, we're now joined on the line by Alex Kiarie, who's a Kenyan journalist and a Pan-African political commentator. Alex, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much, Peter, and welcome.
All right, talk to us a little bit about today's protest action. What's behind it, and what are the main demands of the organizers?
Yesterday, some more damning revelations emerged from the investigations by the police oversight body. And according to the report that came out, the sentry who had been arrested earlier on and given a statement recanted his earlier statement and gave a more damning one that implicated the
Alex, we're struggling to hear you. I'm wondering if you've muted.
Not really. I don't think I've muted.
Okay. All right. Okay, so he gave a more damning version of the statements. What did he say?
So he said that he received a statement, or rather a call from his commanding officer, who's the head of the station, where Ojwang was allegedly being brought to, indicating that the Deputy Inspector General of Police had ordered that the inmate who will be brought in that evening of 7th of June needed to be dealt with. In other words, to be punished. So the sentry sent for some money, and it actually was delivered 2,000 shillings, which is around 275 rands, which was used to buy alcohol for the inmates who were supposed to execute that role. So the inmates, after being, of course, given the alcohol, they were taken to the cell where Ojwang was being held with the express orders of beating him up because he had allegedly offended the boss. However, according to him, the inmates could have gone overboard and actually beaten up more than it was expected, killing him while he's still in the cells. So it was at that moment that they took Ojwang to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. So when these revelations came out yesterday, the Deputy Inspector General of Police, that's Lagat, offered to step aside. And most activists have not taken this lightly. They want him to resign, actually. If you read today's newspaper, Standard, it has actually said clearly, no, just resign. That's the headline. And to push for this, they have called for protests across the country, and most of it is going to be like to shut down the nation and push for this man's resignation, because according to them, stepping aside means that he can be recalled back or be given a different role, because that is the norm. This, according to the protesters and the activists, seems to be the norm, because so many inmates and suspects have been dying in prisons rather than cells before being taken to the courts, which is not supposed to be legal. A person is supposed to be held for not more than 24 hours and be presented before a court of law. But here we have cases of suspects dying in cells, in police custody, and then later it emerges that most of them die by suicide. And another case, for example, that is coming up is of a certain British suspect who died in a prison in the coast of Kenya, and it was also labeled as suicide. So this is the reason why now protests are being organized, and they have not taken off so far. I'm just from town, and I've not seen any happening. But usually, such protests usually peak from around 11 a.m. East African time, which you're waiting to see how it turns out to be. Peter,
I think you may have partly answered my next question, because I mean, you've been a journalist in the country for a long time now, and you've cited some examples of so-called suicides. That a deputy police commissioner, inspector general, can say a prisoner needs to be dealt with. This means that there's been a culture of excessive force by police and issuing out their own justice at times over the years. Is this what's been playing out? And it's just for them, what's happened is that they hit the wrong person.
Actually, I think they hit the wrong person at the wrong time, because it is not the first time that such cases have been reported across the country. And usually these cases involve cases where senior police officers feel violated by people who are not supposed to have the powers to cross their eyes. Remember, a few years back, there is a lawyer called Willie Kimani, who was representing a motorbike operator in a place called Machakos. The motorbike operator had been arrested, and he had a genuine case, and his bike was detained. So he enlisted a lawyer who, together with the suspect and another person, actually a driver, were killed by the police officer who has since been jailed. There's another case of a police officer who also shot dead the suspect involved in robbery with violence in Nairobi, who is also facing similar charges. So it is just a culture that has been engendered by senior police officers who feel like they have the powers to execute their own forms of justice against the law, just to punish the people they feel should not be questioning their law and authority. So this is what Kenyans are now trying to push for end to, so that they can be able to ensure that everybody who is arrested is accorded the respect and the justice that they need before being proceeded rather to face the court of law, without having to be justice to be meted out by people who are not legal officers in the country.
So this particular case related to a very senior police official, but there are, I think, broader questions being asked, that the police are often deployed to clamp down on opposition voices, people that speak out against the government in general, the president in general, dissenting voices, and human rights activists in particular. Is this what's playing out as well, that these protests are about the general case more than just Ojwang?
Yes, Ojwang is just a trigger. It was something that has been simmering for quite a while. Remember that the cases of abduction and disappearances of people, mostly who are seen to be critical of the government, have been sparking in the recent past, especially in the aftermath of the June 25 protests that saw Parliament breached. So this in itself has seen the government also become more outspoken and more pronounced in the way it deals with the people they view as critical of the activities, but now in an illegal and overzealous and actually over extrajudicial manner. However, activists have been calling for the law to be followed to the letter, so that these kinds of cases of killings, of abductions and disappearances are dealt with, because the Kenyan Constitution has its own forms of has stipulated its own forms of justice, without having to involve police who decide on what to do with a suspect, or what to do in the case of a violation of the law, without having to go through the courts. So it's just a whole trigger to a bigger political issue that has been raised by human rights organizations and other activists in the country, especially the young protesters that have been seeing very active in the streets in the recent past.
This particular case also sounds very much like the police have been trying from the get-go to cover things up. In the first instance, they came up with the version that they had to backtrack from. And now we're hearing about CCTV technicians being among those that were arrested. So it sounds like there's been a big cover-up or an attempt to cover up what really happened.
Yes, cover-ups are very normal in the country, especially whenever police or security agencies are involved, and also the big political players and people who are seen to be financially stable. They buy justice in the country. And in this case, it came at the wrong time, as I indicated, because it came at the time when people were already angry and tired and they wanted something different to be done. Because, as I said, so many cases, previous cases have been reported where cover-ups have happened, accidents involving civilians and innocent people killed by motorists. But these motorists always end up free without having to care about what had happened to the families of the people who have been maimed and killed. So it is just that it's an idea of reforms that has come at the right time, but it has been happening, and cover-ups are very normal in the country, especially whenever security agencies are involved and also senior political players.
President Ruto's government came under serious threat, and his own leadership came under threat with the finance bill protests that we saw. Do you think that these protests could escalate to a point where he may be concerned again about his own tenure?
Actually, Kenyans are already indicating that they are handling or rather dealing with this issue of Ojwang for now, but they are coming back to now focus on the finance bill that is now actually in parliament after the reading of the budget. So we're expecting these protests to actually scale higher. And as actually earlier expected, people were seen to be more afraid of the violent manner or rather violent response by the government. But then last week's protest actually beat that back, and we now expect the protest to be more aggressive and more pronounced, because even the police seem to have heeded the call. And as we saw last week, they were not so aggressive in confronting the protesters. So this could either escalate or just escalate more.
What has been the president's response or his government's response to this scandal of Ojwang?
The president spoke about it, and actually he addressed himself to the same and said that police officers need to follow the law. But as usual, our president has always been coming out to be seen to be accommodative, but through words. However, the actions by his state usually speak the opposite. Abductions have been happening even when he condemns them. The killings of suspects and even crackdown on media has been happening even when he condemns it. And actually, during the national prayer breakfast, he apologized to young people in the country, but yet we saw Ojwang's case happening. So Kenyans don't really trust the president's word, but they normally actually react to his actions, to his government's actions rather.
Similar protests against the police in Nigeria led to the disbandment of one of their special units, and they were calling for reform. Is this something that Kenyans want also, for reform in the police service itself? Actually,
Kenyans just want a cleanup, because in the case of Nigeria, there was a crack unit that had been formed which was accused of killing innocent people. In Kenya, it is the national police that is on this in the spotlight, and this is what is making it even more concerning, because it is not a crack unit or rather unit within the police force that is in focus right now. It is the entire police force and the entire security sector. Remember that a BBC documentary had revealed that some soldiers were involved in the killing of protesters last year. So it's a whole focus on the entire security sector, which is actually making it even more and more concerning for everyone else, because the president seems to be leading a military state, contrary to the constitution of Kenya, which places the people on top of everything else, including the leaders.
This police behavior, is this widespread in terms of right across the country, or is it limited to urban centers such as Kenya?
Actually, it is worse in the rural areas because that's where people are not informed enough to know what. Sorry, I think I received a call.
All right.
In the rural areas, people are very much informed on what to do whenever they are confronted by the police officers. It is there where people actually get more violated because usually they rush to pay a bribe to get out of a sticky situation. So it is not just in the urban centers, it is widespread across the country. And in the country, when you are confronted by a police officer, usually they either go for a bribe or to put you in the cells. And the cells are not in such conditions, humane conditions, to allow you or any suspect to want to be there. So usually people prefer to end the case by paying a bribe and then being let free to go and do whatever they want to do. So this is the injustices, the extrajudicial approach to issues is what has now made the country to be so angry and actually more and more intent on seeing change in the whole security sector in the country.
So you mentioned a military state. Are we saying that this extrajudicial behavior is coming from State House, that it's an instruction coming from the highest office in the land?
You see, they say that when a fish rots, it starts from the head. The police officers usually toe the line, and we have seen them actually be better or good police officers when we had a president who was focused on human rights in the country. That I'm talking about President Kibaki. And whenever he gave orders for the police to behave, they behaved. So in this case, there is some aspect of lethargy, some aspect of condoning of these behaviors by State House itself. So it is clearly a whole matter that needs to be taken vertically and not horizontally.
Peter. All right. So what can we expect in the coming days?
More protests, and maybe the president taking a hardline stance, or maybe bending backwards to accommodate the protesters' demands. But it's not going to be a smooth ride for the state and for the government, and especially for the police officers, because if now the police cave in and do whatever they want, the protesters want, they will demand for more. And maybe it will go up to some point. But for now, I think more protests are expected in the coming days. Remember that the finance bill has not been handled, and then we are looking into the anniversary that is coming up in the next few days of the June 25 protests, which will clearly be marked by more protests in the country.
Alex, that's where we're going to leave it. As always, thank you so much indeed for your insightful analysis. Asante sana, kwaheri.
Asante, nashukuru pia, kwaheri.
Thank you. That's Alex Kiarie, a Kenyan journalist and Pan-African political commentator, making sense of these protests. And I can't use another word except the misbehavior of the police in the country. And this death of Ojwang sounds like extrajudicial killing, ordering fellow prisoners to deal with a prisoner who ends up dead in police custody. We'll keep on top of that story.